Well, hello and welcome to the Bitcoinlens episode 14. Today is going to be kind of a follow-on to last week's episode with Bitcoin and US election update. So part 2 of last week. And, we're obviously we're in the final sprint now to the US election. And obviously the US election isn't just the US election, it really affects everything around us, including Bitcoin. So I really wanted to cover that today. But remember to kind of spread the word of the podcast and spread the education of Bitcoin. Please remember to follow me at EmilBTC. I'm on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. So for those of your friends and family that wants to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin, definitely shoot them a link to this podcast and, just help us all educate the masses here. So with that being said, let me jump right into it. So first of all, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, he said Bitcoin will become as big as the entire US housing market this week. So just to kind of give you an idea, Bitcoin's market cap right now is 1.3 trillion. Bitcoin's already overtaken silver. I think is about 1.1 or 1.2 trillion market cap. Gold is about 10 trillion, and then the US housing market that he's referencing is north of 50 trillion. And he thinks it's going to overtake the housing market, which is incredible. Like if you interviewed a lot of these banking CEOs like 6 years ago, even more recent, they would have said Bitcoin's going to zero, and now they're really supporting Bitcoin. And you can't have bigger cheerleaders right now than these 12 big US ETF banks. So that was pretty promising. Another thing this week was looking at BlackRock and Fidelity with a major surge in ETF buys. So you probably saw the price of Bitcoin went all the way from like 60, even it touched the 50s and then hit $68,000. So pretty crazy jump there. And right now, BlackRock and Fidelity, they've now got a combined 550,000 Bitcoin. And that kind of accounts for about $36 billion in Bitcoin just from these two entities. And there are two of the 12 ETFs. If you look at all 12 ETFs, all 12 US ETFs now own about 942,000 Bitcoin, which is crazy. Of course, there's only 21 million Bitcoin, so kind of do the math there. A little bit less than 5% there, but really, really incredible numbers there. Sorry, less than 0.5% there. Also, one thing that's interesting there is Fidelity bought, just in one day this week, they bought $239 million worth of Bitcoin. So crazy buy-ins there from their investors. Now, they're valued at roughly 63 billion in Bitcoin ETF holdings, and it's basically these ETFs, these Bitcoin ETFs, is the fastest growing ETFs in the history of US ETFs. So it's pretty incredible that these Bitcoin ETFs just pretty much left everything else in its trail, and really nice to see that Fidelity and BlackRock leading the way there. Obviously, there's a bunch of others, but really good to see that. So, moving on a little bit, going to Michael Saylor. So he said recently this week he wants to turn MSTR, which is MicroStrategies, he wants to turn that into the world's first $1 trillion bank. He said it's the most valuable asset in the world. If you haven't followed Michael Saylor, he's a huge proponent of Bitcoin, so definitely follow him. He's a very, very intelligent guy. He went to MIT, and he's just really, really intelligent. And the way that he looks at Bitcoin, looks at it from multiple perspectives, not just the scientific perspective, but also just from a value perspective and the problems it can solve for this world. But I quote, he said, the end game is to be the leading Bitcoin bank or merchant bank, or you could call it a Bitcoin finance company. That's kind of what he said recently. And if we end up with 20 billion of convertible notes, 20 billion of preferred stock, 10 billion of debt, and say 50 billion of some kind of debt instrument and structured instrument, we'll have 100 to 150 billion dollars of Bitcoin. So MicroStrategy really leading the way there. And if you don't know their strategy, they've implemented some convertible notes and issued out some debt to in turn use that money to buy Bitcoin, and with that yield purchase more money, and so more Bitcoin. So really, really impressive stuff there from MicroStrategy. So moving on to UAE. UAE, you can now actually, big announcement there at UAE, you can now actually buy property with Bitcoin in the UAE, and this was announced this week. So That is a big one, and we know they've got UAE been getting very lax on Bitcoin policy and much more Bitcoin friendly, and it's already tax free. It's already a tax free place, and just one of those things to think of if you ever head out to UAE. That it's super, super, super business friendly, investor friendly, and now also super Bitcoin friendly, and you can buy property. Also, keep staying in the Middle East. Also announced this week that Qatar. There's rumors that Qatar will invest $500 billion in Bitcoin. So, once you see the Middle East really jumping in, along with the West, and obviously Latin America already proving they're really into Bitcoin. Some of those nations, game theory is going to kick off, and it's going to be gradually, then suddenly, is what I predict with the Bitcoin adoption cycle. Really, it's the adoption has already been incredible. But if you look at the corporate side of things, it's, the maturity level is so new still, from most investors, most baby boomers right now, their exposure to Bitcoin has really started this year via the ETFs. So think of that for a second. We're about 10 months into that, and there's so much more to come. So you don't want to be left behind in the dust on this stuff. Also, just, a little bit of bad news for Bitcoin in Italy, where they raised Bitcoin capital gains tax to 42% from 26%. I also saw Italy raised the capital gains in general for all other assets as well, but particularly Bitcoin. And UK also raised capital gains taxes this week. So not great to see UK and Italian their governments being so kind of anti-citizen and anti-business, and really, really pushing business away from those countries. Because raising capital gains to 42%, you're now in the higher tiers of capital gains around the world. So not a great look there, and not good for Bitcoin there in that part of the world at least. So China came out with a big announcement as well. Just kind of moving on to China here, they're going to start taxing the ultra rich on foreign investments. So they've seen a little bit of a dwindling in their fiscal revenue apparently due to a slowdown on some of their land sales, and this is a key source of income for the Chinese. So they're also trying to address some income equality, but in a nutshell, they're trying to now tax not just foreign assets from Chinese citizens, but also public companies in Hong Kong and the US, for instance. So a 20% tax they're going to slap onto their citizens for any assets, any foreign assets or public companies owned that are based in the in the US or Hong Kong. So that's not great news for Chinese investors, but obviously they've got some goals there. And China also announced 6 trillion yuan of bonds to kind of fund as part of this kind of aggressive economic stimulus they're going after here. And they're trying to, in US dollars, that's $850 billion in US dollars that they want to accumulate over the next 3 years. So that's what they're going to issue in bonds, 850 billion worth, and this will help them stimulate economy, as well as the taxes that I just mentioned. They're going to slap onto their investors as well that have foreign investments. So from a little bit coming home to, this was kind of interesting to me on an electrical standpoint and energy source standpoint, since obviously we've been, I would say the last couple of decades, we've seen a dwindling support in nuclear energy, nuclear reactors. But I saw Google, they're actually now they just ordered 7 small modular reactors. And so those 7 small SMRs, so that's tiny reactors that gives you about 1 gigawatt of energy. And they bought this from California's Cairo Power. So they did this kind of in the name of their cloud storage and generative AI. But really, for me, the way I look at this is kind of promising that we're seeing more of an adoption of nuclear reactors and nuclear energy, because I think this can also help power. This can definitely help power the Bitcoin network as well, and help mining and fund mining. So great energy source for mining there. So the first SMR is going to be built by 2030, and then the rest of them they're going to build by 2035. So interesting news there from Google there. Going on to Japan, so there's a public company in Japan named Metaplanet, and they bought 106 Bitcoin. So that's worth 1 billion yen or $6.6 million. Now, Metaplanet, their hotel business, they often offer Bitcoin investments, some Web3 consultation, and some other consultation that they do. But once again, I'm just trying to give a touch here on the global adoption of Bitcoin. And as we can see, it spans everywhere. Like in my previous podcast, how I went to Latin America with El Salvador and Panama and some of these places really adopting Argentina now, possibly. And now you're seeing it being adopted all throughout. I've already talked about Australia, places in Europe. You see the UAE, Japan, China getting more lax. So really promising there. Interesting from Serbia as well. Prince Phillip of Serbia, he said Bitcoin will outcompete all fiat currencies. So interesting news there from Prince Phillip of Serbia. Haven't really heard much Bitcoin news there, but good to see some of their leaders there are super pro Bitcoin. And he can obviously see the writing on the wall with, the debt bubble growing, the housing bubble growing, and the printers growing everywhere. He can kind of see the writing on the wall. So I thought some wise words there from Prince Philip of Serbia. Now, the Korean, moving on to the Korean side of the house, looking at Korean Virtual Assets Committee, they were saying they're going to hold a meeting this month to discuss approval of Bitcoin ETFs. So we may even see Korea with Bitcoin ETFs. And we're also seeing South Korea now announcing this week that they're going to try and allow institutions to buy Bitcoin and crypto, as well as planning to lift the ban on some of the cryptocurrency ETFs. So this is really, really promising from South Korea, and the adoption is just getting wide. It's really crazy to me. Every time I speak about this, and I think back, it's just this year that the U.S. ETFs got launched. It feels like years ago, but it's just this year, like January, February. These ETFs got approved, and honestly, seeing how the rest of the world is now following the U.S. and exposing traditional investors and folks on the W-2s, exposing those 401ks to ETFs, and seeing some creative things like in Hong Kong where you have in-kind Bitcoin ETFs where they can literally exchange their ETF holdings or ETF shares for actual Bitcoin. It is really mind-boggling how fast this is growing. So if you're not on this train yet, I don't know what to tell you, but obviously I'm not a financial advisor, but yeah, you're probably going to be left behind. Now, Thailand, they're also about to ease their rules on local funds, Bitcoin's investments, and that's according to Bloomberg. So also some good stuff there in Thailand. El Salvador announced this week they're going to buy back $940 million in debt. So they're trying to get completely debt free by 2030. They've also been at the helm of the IMF, and they've been buying one Bitcoin since 2022, and they're getting out of this debt cycle. And obviously, not just Bitcoin, but also so they're super pro business policies with zero capital gains on businesses, on tech businesses, and very, very minimal tax. Very low tax and zero income tax. So very, very pro business and pro Bitcoin there from Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. So super promising there. And this could also have a positive impact on the price of Bitcoin, by the way. Them paying off their debt and them being able to now buy more Bitcoin. This will also enhance the country's ability to support Bitcoin investments and position itself as basically just a stronger advocate for cryptocurrency. So that's some of the world news this week that I've seen in Bitcoin, some of the top stories there. And moving on to the US elections. So, US elections, obviously, this is heating up nicely. And, we've talked a lot about, who's more pro Bitcoin. But I just wanted to kind of go over a few things I saw this week that were interesting to me in the election cycle and kind of where my mind is at. So looking at the polls, I saw Polymarket. Obviously, the betting market is the spread is just it's shifting further and further toward Trump. So right now, I saw today, recent as today, it's at 61% to 38% in favor of Trump. So that was kind of interesting. I also saw Kamala Harris was joining NPR for a crypto interview. So I was kind of excited. I was like, okay, well, this is going to mean we're going to hear some good news on her crypto policy, and maybe she's changed her ways. Cut a long story short, it was a super vague interview, no specific promises like Loomis, RFK, Trump, Vivek, and she only promised to protect certain sectors of our society. And she basically said, I quote, "We will encourage innovative technologies like AI and digital assets while protecting our consumers and investors." So you be my guest in trying to predict with what that is actually meaning. And there's no specific things there. I was looking for, give me a right to self custody, and um, let's maybe look at the tax policies on Bitcoin, and things like that. And are we going to have a strategic reserve in Bitcoin? Things like that. So that was very specifically said by Trump, Loomis, RFK at the Bitcoin conference I attended earlier this year, but I'm still not hearing anything from her from a Bitcoin perspective. Now I know, obviously, maybe some of you on listening here, you're not voting specifically just on Bitcoin policy, which that's completely fair. I'm just saying from a Bitcoin perspective, there's just no comparison. It's like it's a no brainer. You arguably have the Bitcoin OG now on Trump's side with RFK. He's been pro Bitcoin and stacking Bitcoin out for years, so there's no comparison there for me. Eric Trump is announced to speak at Bitcoin MENA, so Middle East, North Africa Bitcoin conference there in December. So once again, the Trumps going to the Bitcoin conferences, and say about them what you want. You don't like them, you dislike them. I'm keep seeing them pop up at the Bitcoin conferences, and they could have just been super vague like Kamala and just said like, hey, we're gonna have innovative technologies like AI and digital assets, and we're gonna protect consumers and investors with their crypto assets. But what does that mean? So it's great for me to see these politicians and now, some of their family members attending these Bitcoin conferences. So just kind of looking some of the state of the nation items there on the election. Interesting stuff there is I saw this week the number of houses for sale in Florida just skyrocketed and have nearly doubled in the past year. So that's super, super concerning. Houses being available. I don't know if a lot of these folks just can't afford these mortgages, 8% interest rates. The economy obviously not looking good. Inflation super high. I've also looked at the restaurant price index is also looking terrible, meaning people can't afford to eat out anymore compared to what they have in the past. But yeah, I think we've got a possible housing crash incoming, and that's another fear of mine, and that's also why I'm divesting a little bit out of real estate and more into Bitcoin. So you look at hurricanes. I read the other day, listened to a podcast as well the other day where they mentioned like you may see insurance companies actually leave Florida now because of all these hurricanes. So imagine having all your generational wealth or investment wealth there in real estate in Florida or a place with a lot of natural disasters, and then the insurance companies just give you a ring one day and tell you, hey, they're leaving. We're not insuring any houses anymore. Just imagine how stressful that would be sitting with a house there or multiple houses and just waiting for your net worth to just get demolished by a massive hurricane like Milton. To move on, so great interview I listened to this week. Donald Trump is at the Bloomberg Economic Forum, hosted by, I guess, the Economic Club of Chicago, which is apparently a very affluent economic club. It's a really good interview. I invite you to go listen to it yourself, and just talking about how he's going to implement tariffs to kind of protect the U.S. dollar, to protect trade, and how that's going to feed companies into and bring companies into the U.S. So really interesting listen there. They did invite Kamala Harris as well, and she declined. So, once again, for me as a voter, I'm trying to make a decision, and I'm not hearing the candidate speak about these topics, at these economic forums, at these Bitcoin conferences. Big red flag for me. Big red flag. So, very good listen there. Highly recommend you go check it out. I also looked at some things today, like, the average cost of families' annual health insurance premium up 7% over the last 12 months to a record $25,000. That is the annual cost of a family's annual health insurance. Let that sink in. 7% up in the last 12 months. So people already squeezed so much with inflation. And now you're seeing health insurance premiums going up too, which that's not involuntary, right? And this is, by the way, this is the second consecutive year with a 7% increase. So on the money side, so US M2 money supply hit 21 trillion in August. So kind of for those of you not familiar with M2, M2 is just essentially all the US dollars that sits in cash, sits in checking account, savings account, and CDs as well. So $21.1 trillion in August. And this is the highest level since January 2023. Of course, with us printing, money printer keeps going, 170 billion to Ukraine, and we've seen many billions as well to Israel. And these wars are not funding themselves. We do need a printer for that. So money's going up, money supply is going up, M2 money supply is going up, inflation's going up, and we're getting squeezed harder. Your US dollars sitting in those savings account are getting debased every single day. So hopefully you got some Bitcoin to kind of protect yourself from that. And finally, for those a little bit more concerned about, non kind of economic, Bitcoin type issues, like we look at the border. I noticed the Border Patrol Union with over 16,000 members officially endorsed President Trump for president, and so that was kind of an interesting one to see there. And obviously we've heard a lot of back and forth about who'd be better for the border, but that's pretty promising if the Border Patrol Union actually endorses you. So interesting there. And finally, the USA, just to kind of go back to the wars, I just looked this one up real quick. USA gave Israel $18 billion plus another $5 billion in military support in the last year. So you take the 170 billion to Ukraine and another 23 billion US dollars to Israel. Let that sink in, and that is pretty much all I have for this week's update. A lot of crazy stats there and concerning stats. So the way I ask myself as well is like, I look at the last 4 years, look at the previous 4 years. Yeah, no comment. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm going to make my decision this time, I think. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that episode. And that was kind of the highlights of Bitcoin this week. Hope to see you on the next pod. And remember to share, like, follow, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you.